Okay, let's try again. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Palm Springs. To everybody that's visiting, welcome. And to everybody in the room, please, your thanks for supporting our lecture series here at Modernism Week. Sadly, this is the last day for this year, but I'm sure we'll be back. And this has been a very, very fun and extraordinary experience. So I hope those of you who have been to lectures this week have enjoyed them. Just ask you to turn off your cell phones, please, and to refrain from using your phones during the presentation. The other thing I'd like to do is just thank you for your cooperation with the mask mandates. I know it's can be irritating, but we do appreciate your cooperation with that. And if we could ask you to leave your masks on during the performance and during the presentation, the mask wearing is the only way we've been able to proceed with this event. So we do appreciate your cooperation. Um, Today is one of the highlights of the series. And first, I'd like to thank H3K for supplying the furniture that you see our guests on. And before we begin, I'd like to welcome to the stage a guy who has put together, yet again, a wonderfully diverse group of presenters for our lecture series. So please welcome Mark Davis.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's so great to see you. I really had a hard time this morning getting here because I couldn't decide which scarf to wear. Should I wear something bright? Something long and bright? These scarves are just every single one. I'm just reaching into a bag and pulling them out. This is how beautiful her scarves have been, throughout her career. And I got a little obsessed on it. I now own about 200 of them, but many of them are going to guests at the party tonight. So, all of our volunteers are wearing Vera. I decided on this one because it was my Kusama socks. So that's why it was so difficult this morning. But I couldn't be happier to have this program. It was a weird way to get here because I had a Breuer content track earlier in the week, and I read that Marcel Breuer designed a home for Vera Neumann. And that's sort of, I knew her, and I started researching her, and oh my God, you go down the rabbit hole with this. And then I came across a book that Susan Seid had written. It's no longer published. If you can find it on eBay, it's expensive, but it was gorgeous. And I said, I've got to find this woman. She lives in Tucson. She owns all of Vera's artwork, and that's all I'm going to say because people will have proper introductions. But Susan is carrying forth her legacy, and we'll learn more about her and everything else as we meet our guests. But first, because I need to get off the stage, Anne Rowe is a board member for Modernism Week. She's also the Director of Curations and Collections at Annenberg Sunnylands, and she is going to moderate this morning's program. So, Anne Rowe.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody, for being here on this chilly morning. Yes, as Mark said, I'm moderating. He asked me after tickets went on sale, so I want you to know that the first tickets I bought for Modernism Week were for this panel, because I wanted to make sure I had a seat in this house. So I sit here a fan and an enthusiast just like you to learn from this esteemed panel today about Vera Neumann. So we're going to jump right in. I just want to outline what the program will be. We're going to start with some visual presentations, followed by a panel conversation, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So please reserve all your questions for the end because we have a lot of wonderful visual material to go through, and just try to think about what question you want to ask at the end. So let's get started. I'll introduce our panel. So Trina Turk, in the pink, is the founder of the Trina Turk fashion brand. For the one person in this audience who might not know, Trina's popular brand is well known for its signature prints, bold color, and an optimistic outlook inspired by California. Trina is an architecture and design hobbyist, and she's lived part-time in Palm Springs since 1998. Trina was first exposed to the Vera iconography at home. Vera's casually chic renderings of flowers and plants appealed to Trina's Japanese mother. The suburban household of Trina's youth included Vera dishes, sheets, towels, and placemats. What a chic mom you had. Susan Seid, in the blue Vera shirt, is a graduate of the Fashion Institute of Technology. She spent her career in the direct mail industry in various executive positions. In 2005, Susan purchased the assets of the Vera Corporation and revitalized the brand. Susan then later sold the business in 2013, but importantly, she retained much of the original Vera artwork. And so she now collaborates with galleries and museums exhibiting and selling Vera artworks. Susan is the author of the book Vera, The Art and Life of an Icon, published in 2010. Susan recalls, quote, "During my childhood, Vera was everywhere, in our homes, the homes of our neighbors, and as scarves around the necks of our mothers. Having been in the garment industry back in the 70s, Susan says she knew that Vera was a force." Alexander Gray, in the blue, is owner and principal of Alexander Gray Associates, a contemporary art gallery in New York City and in Germantown, New York in the Hudson Valley, founded in 2007. Through exhibitions, research, and artist representation, the gallery spotlights artistic movements and artists active in the 20th and 21st century. The gallery is well known for its expertise in and commitment to artists who have been underrepresented in the art market. Alexander participates in the leading art fairs globally, including Art Basel, Frieze art fairs in London, New York, and LA. And Gray and his husband have been part-time residents of Palm Springs since 2019, where they are stewards of a home at the Barry Burkus-designed Park Imperial South. Alex's interest in Vera Neumann started through his collecting of Vera napkins and tabletop items, like many of us. After reading Susan's book on Vera, through Kismet, Alex and Susan met in 2013, and they began a friendship and then collaborated to bring Vera's original artwork to a broader spotlight. So in 2014 and 15, Alex presented 2 solo exhibitions of Vera Neumann's original artwork at his New York gallery in collaboration with Susan. And these exhibitions were covered by Art Forum, Art in America, and the Wall Street Journal. Last but not least, Alyssa Author is currently the Deputy Director of the Curatorial Affairs and the William and Mildred Lasden Chief Curator at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York City. Her exhibitions and scholarship focus on American modernism, feminist contemporary art, and the history of craft. Alyssa has long been a fan of the Vera brand, but it was Alex's exhibitions of Neumann's watercolors that introduced her to the, quote, artist behind the brand. This was central to her conception of the exhibition she curated called Vera Paints a Scarf, the art and design of Vera Neumann, which ran in 2019. And it's full circle. Trina attended both the shows at Alex's galleries and Alyssa's exhibition. So you can see there's a lot of organic sort of interaction up here with this group. And so we're going to learn a lot today. So without further ado, I will introduce the first visual representation of the Vera brand today. Please welcome Susan Seid.
Welcome to the Vera Fan Club. And to the, oops, excuse me, not my forte. So, is it on? Okay, we're going to start over. Welcome, Vera fans, and future Vera fans. How many of you remember her from the 60s and 70s? There you go. it's an amazing brand because it has this transgenerational appeal. And so I'm finding that younger people are becoming some of the most avid fans as well. So Vera, excuse me if I do this, I will try my best. Vera was an unlikely revolutionary. She had a radical idea for the time, believing in art's ability to uplift and inspire. She felt that it should not be relegated only to the walls, that we should surround ourselves with it, and in our everyday lives, we should wear it, dine off of it, dream under it. So what happened to Vera as because of this idea? Where did it bring her art? Well, it brought her to the White House. First Lady Bess Truman selected her Jack in the Pulpit design that she was collaborating with Schumacher, and it was hung in the solarium in the White House, and it remained there through the Johnson administration. It brought her to the scarf collections of Hollywood celebrities like Grace Kelly, and most famously to Marilyn Monroe, who draped herself only in a Vera scarf during her last photo shoot, which was done by Bert Stern in 1962. Just a little aside, I had the opportunity to meet and spend time with Bert Stern, and he was reminiscing about this photo shoot, and he said, I brought the Dom Perignon, she brought her scarves, and the rest is history. So this is just a little aside. If you look at the edge of the bottom stripe going down Maryland, you'll see a little scar peeking out that she had recently had an appendectomy. And I love the authenticity of this shot because it predates Photoshop. I mean, we would never know this, right? So where else did her idea bring her? Well, it brought her to the meal. Let me back up a moment. Her scarf business burgeoned. The popularity was unbelievable. She would take not only a design, she would then color it in numerous ways. There's another one. So in 1971, the Emil Walters Gallery up on the Upper East Side in New York did a retrospective of Vera's work. The first one to come in and purchase a work was John Lennon. It brought her to the People's Republic of China. The story goes, Henry Kissinger walked out and Vera walked in. She had been invited by them. She was said to them, how kind of you to be inviting American designers. And they said, oh, we're not inviting all the American designers. We're inviting you. She had admired the design and workmanship of scarves that were being manufactured in China. And they even created her own signature, or chop. And it was a combination of the words truth and honesty. It brought her to the Smithsonian. I think, Ian, Anne's ahead of me. It brought her to the Smithsonian, where she was named the first in the resident artist program, the likes of which, like Georgia O'Keeffe and Alexander Calder, actually followed her. And the Smithsonian honored her with a retrospective of her work. During the time I owned the company, we updated, just in terms of shape and fabrication, some of the scarves. And in homage to the Maryland shot, we did this one with the Foucault pendulum, which is what you've been looking at. The original was a sketch, and the work itself is still at the Smithsonian, and the Vera companies made it into a scarf, and we continued that. In the 1960s, Vera designs were everywhere. In the press, find department stores tied on the necks of stylish women, decorating the homes of my neighbors, my friends, and pretty much everyone I knew. We all had the towels, placemats, and sheets brimming with Vera's cheerful flowers and trendy geometrics. Our mothers coveted their Vera scarves and wanted to be the first for the very newest design, to wear the latest blouse or dress. For over 4 decades, Vera's artwork brightened up our homes across America and sold in tens of thousands of stores around the world. So, how did this all begin? Vera was born Vera Salif in Stamford, Connecticut in 1907. She was the third of 4 children, Fanny and Meyer Salif, and they encouraged each one of their children to find a passion and to really focus on it. Vera's was art. She said that as a child growing up along the Rippewan River, I would draw flowers and dream someday of becoming an artist. Her father would pay her 50 cents to fill a sketchbook with drawings, and he would take her to the Metropolitan Museum every Sunday. As an aside, when I owned the Vera Company, we signed a licensing agreement with the Met because they have her scarves in their collection. And we were chatting about the intergenerational component of Vera. The fellow who was in charge of product development there at the Met gave me a call because he too had seen the book. And he said, there's a photo in there with Vera sitting in front of wallpaper. That wallpaper was in my grandmother's kitchen. Vera collaborated with her sister Alex, who was a writer. She became a writer, and they wrote a fun children's book called Words Are Funny. Vera did the artwork, and Alice wrote the words. Vera was inspired by nature. She said, nature overwhelms me constantly. And so it was a great inspiration in her work. She also said that if you were putting colors together, you could never go wrong if you followed nature. Vera graduated from the Cooper Union School of Art and Science. She received a fine arts degree, and she became friends with other artists like Lee Krasner, who later married Jackson Pollock. She went on to the Traphagen School, which was for fashion, and it was here that she was inspired to bridge the art and the fashion world. As I mentioned, Vera was inspired by nature. She had a fern garden outside her home. And these slides that we're going to be showing you, or images that we're going to be showing you, will give you an idea of the process. This slide will show you actual ferns and pieces of nature that she found, and she taped them together, and she would then start doing sketches. So you see this as the next thing. She would take pieces of that and do sketches, and then turn those sketches into product. Here's a little Irish linen hand towel. So you see how the sketches evolved into the actual product. This is a placemat. And this is called meadow ferns. I personally love this one. And if you look, you can see how she took actual ferns, put them in the paint, and then pressed them to create the artwork. In the 1960s, Vera's designs were everywhere. In the press, fine department stores, tied around the necks of stylish women. And our mothers coveted their Vera scarves and wanted to be the first to be wearing them. It was quite a competition. So the question becomes, how did this all begin? Well, she was born Vera Salif in Stamford, Connecticut in 1907. Remember that date, considering what she accomplished. She was only 5 feet tall, too. A very tiny figure. But, you know, full of talent and inspiration. She was the third child. Oh, you know, am I repeating myself? You know? Everybody was getting very quiet, including me. Okay, moving right along. So Vera met George Neumann. He was an advertising executive from a prominent Viennese textile family. Vera said that he was handsome and sophisticated, and he owned an Austin Healey, which was a big deal. So they fell in love. They were married in 1938, and shortly after, they moved into an apartment in Gramercy Park where the former tenant had been Henry Luce. It was there that they began to collaborate with the idea of printing Vera's artwork on placemats and napkins. And they chose those products because they could set up their own little silk screen and then dry them in the oven. She added her signature to the design, and that's how the whole thing started. She was the first to create a signature scarf. She was the first to put print on a sheet. I mean, this seems like it's so ordinary today, but back then, it was not the way it was. She really was a trailblazer. So their business grew, and along with a new partner, F. Werner Ham, they approached B. Altman Department Store, who gave them a large order. The orders kept coming in, but they needed help to make everything. And it was during this time that Schumacher heard of the company and Vera, and it began decades-long relationship between them. One day, while she was searching the market for more linen and cotton for the placemats, she found that it had become very scarce because of the war effort. But what she came across was excess parachute silk. So she just shifted gears, used that as her canvas, and that's what started her legendary scarf business. Her first scarf sale was to Lord & Taylor in 1947. The business grew and grew and was in need of a larger place. George and Vera found a Georgian mansion in Ossining, which is up north on the Hudson from New York City, which had had a screen printing facility in the basement. They bought it and they moved in upstairs. Vera's philosophy was different than many designers of the time. She believed in the democratization of art. She said, "I don't believe that only the wealthy deserve good things." So these are shots of the upstairs in Ossining. There's a little shot of George seated there. And the business kept growing, and it outgrew that space. So as students of the Bauhaus movement, George and Vera went to the very top architect, Marcel Breuer, which we heard about earlier, that connection, when it came to build their very own home. Sited high above the Hudson, they moved in with their 2 children and George's parents in 1952. As an aside, I had the privilege of going to see their house when it went on the market not long ago. And, you know, it's funny how we sometimes don't recognize why things resonate with us. But I grew up in a home outside of Boston, and it was very mid-century. It was that floor-to-glass ceiling, the flagstone floors, and I'm like, this just feels, you know, so familiar in a very long ago and far away place. Their home was full of artwork, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, because these were friends. They were friends with a number of artists. Actually, someone told me that Vera had a little crayon sketch, and it was in her bathroom, and it was signed Picasso. And she said she loved having it there because she felt we should not take art seriously. We should just enjoy it. So one of her closest friends was Alexander Calder. And the story goes that one day he called to say he was bringing over a housewarming gift. Nice friend to have, right? And so he came up Finney Farm Hill in a pickup truck with this 14-foot mobile on the back, and he sighted it himself in her front yard. And some years later, it went up for auction. Oh, I will mention, I'm skipping over. Vera, in homage to Calder, did scarves with his mobiles. And it may be difficult to read from where you're sitting, but you can see there's a little writing in the lower right-hand corner in that yellow square, and it says Calder, I love you, Vera. Some years later, this is out of Sotheby's catalog, it sold and it broke all records for sales. It ended in a thunderous applause and standing ovation. Some years later, oh yes, Mars was passing just in a certain way so that they didn't have to, they could take advantage of the sun. So he was very careful about this. He also designed Vera's showrooms. I mean, just imagine that. And you can see different areas. They were also very innovative in that they kept a lot of the product behind doors. So it felt very, again, it felt very modern. If you look at the wall here, those are wine corks that they used. So one of the things that Vera was well known for is engineering prints. She was a pioneer. What does that mean? It means that the print will always stay in the same place on a garment, as opposed to a random print that will move around. But this is a good example of engineered print. So that tree that's on the right-hand side of the blouse will always be, every piece will be like that. In 19, and don't you love this? I mean, don't you just love this? I said, this is so Vera, this, wonderful jumpsuit. In 1960, she launched Vera Sportswear, and Perry Ellis joined as merchandise manager. This slide is a little fuzzy because it actually is a screen grab off a video that was done talking about, in the company of Vera. So Perry Ellis, Vera helped mentor Perry Ellis, and he did such a wonderful job that he was given his own line portfolio. And bright patterned tunics and jumpsuits, and you've got to love this, right? I mean, it's so of the time. That design on the jumpsuit on the leopard rug is called Bantry Bay, and it was inspired by her trip to Ireland. Department stores across the country carried collections in accessories, fashion, and home departments. She was a dominant force. She was the first one to do cross-licensing, which means not only clothing or accessories, but fashions for the home. These are examples of, well, I owned the company and we wanted to bring the fashion into these times. So we took her designs and we made them a little more contemporary, which shows, and these sold very well, it shows her enduring appeal. Travel was a very big component of Vera. Aside from nature, travel was her second biggest source of inspiration. And she loved Japan. One of the favorite countries that she visited often, and she was well known for sumi brush, which is that larger brush, and it gives a very loose feeling. She licensed with Mikasa to do her dishes, Here she is at their factory, you know, sitting right down and painting out a plate. One of the other things that Vera did was use silk screen poster art to announce different travels and new collections. And this one is from Ibiza. And as you see, it says, "To me, fashion is an ever-changing art." They also use this. She worked with a very savvy advertising firm run by a woman, too. And again, think of the times. Think of the times that you had this. But they used Vera paints to underscore the fact that she was an artist first and foremost. But then they'd use a turn of phrase like, for Denmark, Vera paints Danish to go, or Vera paints jewels of India, or Vera paints Peru, or Vera paints a Moroccan pony or Persian garden. These are some of the ads. I mean, and they also do the sidebar and to connect with their customers, and tell them what was going on with Vera. Her fans were very interested in her personally as well as her work. She even this is called Oriental Poppies, and Alex will discuss this later. This is a very well-known piece of her artwork, and he'll tell you how he was behind finding a new home for it. I'm assuming. So, you know, one of the things too with fashion that these days we turn our noses up at, but she did easy care fabrics, which was welcomed by housewives at the time. You know, Banlon, which, as I say, we go, oh, but it was great for travel. It could get, you know, just thrown in the wash, and so her customers loved that. Also, her fearless use of color. She, as I mentioned, she brought orange into the home. She had a big argument with the people in her company. They were like, who's going to put orange in their home? Well, okay, who's guilty out here? I know I had orange shag carpeting at one point too, I confess. But she really felt that color was very important. So let me not repeat myself again. So in the early 60s, Vera lost her beloved husband, George, to a heart attack. And although the business had grown, she decided to sell to Manhattan Industries in 1967. This allowed the company to grow to above $100 million in sales worldwide. Again, these are 1970s dollars. And as I mentioned before, her products were sold in 20,000 stores around the world. You think of that impact. She's woven into the fabric of this country. And she was part of our lives because she was so ubiquitous. She was also a role model, someone whose independence and entrepreneurial spirit were very inspiring to upcoming women like myself. Vera was also a pioneer in so many ways. Because people were copying her work, she was the first designer to copyright her art. She has 8,000 designs in the Library of Congress. And she was the first to trademark her signature name, which has, you know, was coveted by other people. Just ended at that. She embraced a global perspective long before it was popular. And when her beloved husband George died, she became a working single mother, raising 2 children. Her ability to juggle multiple and seemingly contradictory roles with such grace was truly inspirational. Her friend said of her, Vera couldn't decide whether or not to be a mother, an artist, a business entrepreneur, or a world traveler. So she was all of the above. So thank you for listening. Thank you again, Modernism Week.
Thank you. And now Alexander.
Thanks so much, Susan. It's always just such an inspiration hearing you tell this story, and I've heard it many times from you, and each time there's a new facet. It's really extraordinary. Oh, thank you. Just to back up, yeah, so this little presentation riffing on Vera Paints A, which is something that we incorporated into activities at the gallery. Our journey with this, my husband and I live in the Hudson Valley as well as New York City, and I, as many of us in this room do, get obsessed with something, and it just doesn't stop. So, serving for 50 guests later of Russell Wright dishes, David just said, like, honey, enough. You gotta stop with the dishes. I know we like to entertain, but no. And I was, this is my form of adultery, where these like boxes from eBay showing up with Russell Wright dishes. So in came my pivot, something that maybe took up a little less storage space, was also just as appealing. Whoops, back, forward. And so in came the Vera napkins. I did have a rule. It was quantities of 6 or more. I am a quantity queen. And this is just a fraction of images from our cupboard full of napkins, which we use every day. And one of the joys that we have at home is when we set the table and have guests over, we ask a guest to go to the cupboard and curate the table, which is a great joy. So some of us are Vera scarf collectors, Mark Davis. Some of us are tabletop folks, and yeah, definitely in the latter. A little shot just to reinforce Vera's Jewishness and a connection to that, which I felt very strongly. A setting from one of our Seder plates, Seder dinners, including the matzah, wrapped in one of my favorite patterns. So as Susan alluded to, the kismet that brought us together, with this obsession, similar to Mark, on Amazon comes Vera, The Art and Life of an Icon, as well as a couple other books which were much less interesting. And I devoured this book and was so excited to learn more about Vera's story and how it really coincided with the mission of the gallery that David and I it started in 2007, which has a mission of focusing on artwork and artists whose work had been overlooked by the art market per se. Artists who emerged 60s, 70s, into 80s, and now into 21st century, whose work was overlooked in general because of issues of gender, race, and geography, pushing against the dominant art and modern and contemporary art framework and privilege of, as the Guerrilla Girls call it, male, Yale, and pale. Yeah. We could add to that Yale, male, pale, also not Jewish. So the Vera's story was so compelling, and as Susan included in her book, the marketing around this was just so fascinating that everything reinforced her as an artist. Both these Vera paints a Persian garden, Vera paints an abstract expressionist painting. Certainly, the relationship with Calder was fascinating, but even more fascinating were these displays that she designed with her marketing team for the department stores in which things were sold, which was that they were not just like a table, in the scarf department at Gimbel's. They were these standalone art galleries where the scarves or the napkins would be framed on the walls with instructions of how to both fold a scarf but also how to stretch it on a canvas and treat it like artwork. So all these stories just were so compelling. And reading that Susan was in Atlanta, have a number of friends and clients and colleagues in Atlanta, and I called a colleague, Rebecca Cochran, to say, hey, totally off chance, but our degrees of separation are always really really small. Do you know this person, Susan Seid, who has this like trove of Vera watercolors? Sure enough, the week before, she had connected with Susan through other channels. I think to advise Susan on how to organize this archive of drawings. Rebecca's an art historian and a very specialized collections manager, and we were on the phone the next day, and I think we were on the phone for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. So what came out of that was a very quick trip to Atlanta to Susan's office at the time, and we went through boxes, and it was just extraordinary. And that sparked our first exhibition at the gallery, which we did during the summer months. Vera Paints a Summer Bouquet was how we titled this. This is a poster that we made announcing the exhibition. And it was really wonderful to take these drawings, which were so recognizable, certainly from a napkin collection in the Hudson Valley, but also scarves and the other rabbit hole that we all go through when we Google Vera and on YouTube. We're not alone, us crazies, with the Vera like obsession. There are many of us, and there are people crazier than Mark and myself. Crazy. One of whom is an artist who we're good friends with, Pei White, who had done an extraordinary installation showcasing a portion of her collection of, I think it's probably 10,000 scarves at this point. LA-based artist, fascinating artist who uses textiles and experimentation with form and injects a feminist narrative into the work that she makes. So, making the show was really exciting. We were doing renovation in the upper space of the gallery, so we really focused on consolidating this into a bouquet, and hung this salon style. We really treated everything. We framed things beautifully, and introduced a narrative about Vera to our strata of the art world, many of whom certainly had the I grew up with, my aunt had that, but most of whom were just taken by the pure joy of these images and of the confidence of their hand. As the loop that was going through before we started our individual presentations, which we'll run later, really shows that confidence with the sumo brush of boom. These were one-shot watercolors. I mean, with watercolors, see, I did that. Okay, great. With watercolors, I know, it does. Technology, the Russians. So they don't want us talking about a successful 5-foot-tall Jewish woman, capitalist. Sorry, got political there today, man. Where was I? Beautiful bouquets, sumo brush, confident hand, and a one-shot chance to get a design right. And that immediacy of art making, that connection of eye to brain to hand, is this is the magic of an artist. This is what I'm in awe all the time of, that an artist, a designer can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to show the world something that they haven't seen before. And this was definitely that case. Oh God, I love this show. Then we followed it up with Vera Paints a Rainbow, because with this, extraordinary amount of work that Susan has been stewarding, so many themes could emerge. There could be a whole retrospective of Vera Paints a Carrot, and like you'd have way too much material to work with. So we decided to lean into the spectrum. In our downstairs gallery, we just started with a very sunny wall, and here too, suns everywhere. And then leaned into some more abstract works that incorporated many colors. And then climbing up the stairs to our gallery, we introduced this great quote: "We have so many problems in this world. Color brings just a little joy into our lives." A message we really needed to hear in 2015, a moment of kind of anxiety about the political state of our world, or the anticipation of something great that could have happened with a very smart, successful woman, or what would happen if Russians. So we made this gorgeous installation that wrapped the gallery in the spectrum of the rainbow, and we were able to make these monochrome sections. And the joy of walking through the space and encountering images, whether it was a starfish, a carrot, a bouquet with anemones, was just what we needed that summer. And the show was really well received, and the press loves Vera's story. So there too, we were really delighted that the show was embraced, certainly, by the Wall Street Journal and the story of her entrepreneurship. It was covered in international press as well. But within our strata of the art world, that we have this very serious review from Barry Schwabsky, a renowned art critic, in art form. This was unexpected. This was fantastic. And this underscored that despite Vera's conviction that art should be for everyone and it should be democratic, that it also could exist in the very rarefied and hard to penetrate zones of this art market that I trespass in. So I'll end with just a little shot of one of my favorite items, one of our tabletop items, this great Mikasa platter that is on one of our Danish modern pieces here in Palm Springs, and lots more to talk about. But thank you, and Susan, thank you for this amazing relationship. It's really an honor.
Thank you, Alex. Elissa.
Thanks, Alex. And thank you, Susan. Both of you have created a perfect platform for me to talk about the exhibition Vera Paints a Scarf, which took place at the Museum of Arts and Design in 2019. Let me see if I can go forward here. Here's one view. It was intended to bring together a very, as far as I'm concerned, complex story of Vera Neumann as an American artist, a textile designer, and a design entrepreneur. And together, that story is really about the career of a woman who played an incredibly important role in design history, but whose scope and impact on the field of design is relatively unrecorded and thus unrecognized. And I was shocked and pleasantly surprised by the Art Forum review, let's say in Art Forum, but I can tell you it was a very hard sell for me to put this exhibition in a design museum, and we can talk about that later. So the exhibition was focused on the history of the Vera companies, her design ethos, or the company's design ethos, which was a belief in incorporating art into everyday life through good design. It was about high quality production that highlighted craftsmanship at an accessible price point. Brand identity was an important part of the exhibition. especially Vera's identity as a painter and the way she tried to meld fine art, craft, and industry. And then there's a very interesting history, or in terms of the history of design, there's an example of sort of crafts alliance with design and industry that's really quite innovative here. And that comes from Neumann's interest in the Bauhaus philosophy of breaking down boundaries between art, craft, and industry in the US at mid-century. So let me just give you a little overview of the exhibition. It was divided into 5 units. There's the watercolor and ink painting gallery. You also see a little glimpse here of fashion and the scarves. There's the history of the Vera companies, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. The art of table setting, and then this section on Vera paints, which focuses on brand promotion. So I'll come back to each of these and we can just walk through. So the exhibition narrative began with the history of the Vera companies, and it brought together the earliest scarves I could source. So that would have been 1947 on the parachute silk, as Susan mentioned. And I think I have, let's see, here's a better detail. That one on the left with the leaves is code, and then the linen napkins where you have those designs or those drawings printed. So this also focuses on her interest in nature as a source for her designs. There's a section that focused on Vera's relationship with the Schumacher company, the textile company, where she created hundreds of patterns for interior textiles, and many of those are still in production. And a fun fact, here's some details of the works that we showed. I contacted the Schumacher archives to get these swatches here and to look at some of her examples, because they have a wonderful, they've preserved literally everything. And they happened to mention they were relaunching a group of Vera patterns. It just goes to show you the staying power of her work. And one of them was related to the, let's see, the detail in the center there. What's the name of that one? The
Are you giving me a pop quiz?
Yes. I can't remember now, but it's one of the most popular ones. Many of them are still in production.
Jack in the Pulpit.
Yeah, Jack in the Pulpit. There was like a related version of Jack in the Pulpit. And then I would also point out that this is a design called Birches, which is still in production. And it comes in a textile and then also wallpaper. And we had this printed in a silver lame that throughout the exhibition that Schumacher did for us, which was really quite wonderful. This is one of my all-time favorite patterns. Now, in this, going on through the history here, you see a little section that has to do with her, the creative circle she was a part of, Breuer, Calder, etc., and then the introduction of the ladybug as part of her signature. This area of the exhibition had this kind of oval piece of furniture that I repurposed, and that part of the exhibition was called The Art of Table Setting. And you see on the right one of Vera's brilliant promotional pieces that she would give out to customers, where she explained that the table should be approached as a canvas. And I really think some of her most playful and graphically striking designs can be found on her linen napkin. So I guess that makes me part of Alex's tabletop category. I also took a page from Alex and David's exhibition, where the color wheel is what organizes the objects, because there's just so many, and it's difficult to show any kind of scope if what you decide to do is focus on them in a chronological order, which just isn't as interesting. So they're organized by color here, going around this oval. Very beautiful. And you can see the Schumacher wallpaper in the background. Like everyone who's spoken, I also absolutely love the promotional collateral that the company produced and gave to customers. So inside this oval, I replicated. This is Alex's one of his pattern on pattern dinnerware sets in birches in brown, which I absolutely love. So I included that too. I couldn't resist. So I included one of her pamphlets called Vera Folds Art Napkins in this part of the exhibition, and we replicated the interior of this fold-out little brochure so that you can see the way the napkins were described, and then you have the instructions for folding them. And then there's the section on the watercolors and the ink drawings, of course. Vera's seasonal collections were billed as paintings, printings, and limited edition posters. So we all know that behind every fabric, scarf, table linen, or garment, you know, there was one of these drawings. So I think, I don't know, when we worked in the archive, in your archive, Susan, there must have been, you must have 10,000 in there.
I have a lot.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing. And what I just tried to do, I mean, there's no way to comprehensively even survey the design. So there's a mix of of abstracts, flowers, fruits, animals, insects, etc. Yeah. Here's another good detail here of some of them. There's a small section on scarves, again, limited space, and there's like, I don't know, 200,000, because of course they're all produced in multiple colorways. So very difficult to make any decisions.
Just so people don't faint with that number, it's not 200,000, it's 20.
To me, it looked like 200,000, trying to like put together the checklist for the exhibition. I mean, you almost felt like, let me just take the first 50 I see, and that's fine. That's fine. It'll work out. And so now we're getting into the section of the exhibition that really focused on the brand and the promotion of the brand and the tagline Vera paints, which is, of course, so brilliant and allowed her to emphasize her role as an artist and then use that identity as a bridge into a mass-produced product, right? And actually play with the hierarchies between what it means to make a mass-produced product and what it means to claim your work as art. And asking her customers to do the same. And I'll show you some examples here. This is some of the collateral that came with all of her lines, the Vera paints. So it would be Vera paints a star-spangled butterfly, Vera paints a rainbow, etc., as Susan pointed out. And then some of the most brilliant of the ads were for the cross-licensing with Burlington. And you see here a group of people sitting in a art museum, and it says something like, Burlington brings you an unparalleled event in the history of art, and you're looking at sheets, right? And there's another one that's quite brilliant. Here's another one. It's an original Vera design for Burlington. You can frame it, you can hang it, you can sleep on it. And she did promote the idea that you could frame any of this if you wanted to. And I have another little brochure coming up where she gives you instructions to do that. Some more of the collateral mixed with the tabletop objects and the beautiful hand-printed posters. Some of these brochures were quite detailed, and I'm just going to point out the one that you see here on the bottom. And this has to do with Vera's tour through the Americas in 1971. And in the text, she credits indigenous and visual and material culture as a design source, while we also know, of course, that she's treating culturally specific imagery as decorative motifs in her work at the same time. So this is a complicated aspect of her practice. She was not a direct copier in any way. She very much wanted the cross-cultural references to be recognized, though, to a certain extent. And she also had a sort of very progressive appreciation for craft, especially world craft, at a time in the US where that was still considered maybe an ethnographic object and would not be presented as a work of art or considered to have any value culturally. So on the one hand, she really appeared as a liberal and have a humanistic approach to world culture, although today we're quite aware of the kind of cultural imperialism that this also clearly reflects. And then, Susan, you brought this up, the Breuer designed showrooms, which are absolutely beautiful. She also used this as a place to exhibit her collection of world craft. So she collected many works on her travels, brought them back, and sometimes they would become sources for her pattern. So this is an example of the Tree of Life that is a much more direct reference to this object, which she probably purchased in Mexico. She's in the category with the Eameses, and I would also say Alexander Girard. They're modernists, but they were not anti-craft. They truly believed in the handmade and the value of sort of the skill level and the authenticity that they saw that went into the handmade object, and that should be somehow replicated, or those values should be primary to the kind of product that they were creating too in terms of its quality. She was eventually, just another side note, I found this out in the course of working on the exhibition. She was eventually inducted into the American Craft Council, and then I think also the World Craft Council. And those were organizations that were founded by Aileen Osborne Webb, who was the founder of what is now the Museum of Arts and Design. So this exhibition really came full circle. Some more examples of the various colorways. There's a small section of the scarves here. This is a historic example of one of the early scarves known as the wingtip. And this brilliant brochure here, 14 ways to tie a scarf that's a painting, that's 14 ways to tie a scarf that's a painting, that's a scarf. Yeah, hard to get around that. And it mimics, Art View mimics the masthead of a very popular magazine in this time called Art News. So it's very clever. And then there's a small section of fashion here. You see in the foreground, in the case, the Jolly Top, which is their first sort of top that was made. It was just two scarves that were sewn together. And then some examples of her beautiful engineered prints. So there's the one there on the top right. And you see in a couple examples here, this beautiful silk blouse where every single part of it, the sleeves, the cuff, the collar, the front, would have been a separate watercolor design and then made into a paper garment in preparation for printing the fabric. And actually a great relationship between the blue butterflies and the dress as well. So I think this might be my last slide. Yeah, so we'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alyssa. So we're going to enjoy our panelists, have a discussion about some of the content, and then we'll turn to Q&A. And I think we should bring it full circle to Trina, our fashion designer, to just comment on understanding the context of Vera in the fashion, continuum.
First of all, is that on? I'd just like to say I'm proud to be in the company of other Vera hoarders. and as far as inspiration goes, of course, Vera is a huge inspiration for what we do at Trina Turk. Prints are copyrighted. All of Vera's prints are copyrighted. So we have a lot of them in what we call our vintage room, which is basically just several large rooms that contain a lot of things that I've bought over the years, and my late husband, Jonathan, in many, many, many years of thrift shopping and flea market shopping. And it's not very well organized, but there's just a lot of stuff in there, and you can go in there and just get inspired for a particular season that we're working on. So we do have a lot of Vera in the collection, and I think that what makes it stand out, we have Pucci, we have Marimekko, we have Lily Pulitzer, we have, prints from all of these iconic print houses. And I think that what makes Vera stand out is just the sort of looseness and spontaneity of the artwork. And that gives it this very kind of carefree, optimistic feeling, which I think is something that is why, that's what made Vera what it is and why it's so appealing to everybody. But also the placement print. Pucci did a lot of placement prints as well. But that's something that we do at Trina Turk. It is more complicated. You basically have to print the fabric to fit the pattern pieces of the garment. So it does make it much more complicated. But in our experience, the items where we spend the time to do that type of placement printing are usually, they're usually good sellers. There's a style that we do called the Theodora caftan, which is basically a square with a neckline. And it's printed, often placement printed with a striped border. And that, I mean, we've been running that style for, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years. It's consistently good. So I think that the care that Vera took in doing those placement prints also made her garments stand out from what was in the market, which is generally just an all-over print that's cut into a garment. So there's no striped border. There's no, as you can see on this this yellow and orange blouse in the front, the way the collar is placed, the way the front placket opening is placed. I mean, all of that makes it much more labor intensive, but also more special. So anyway, I mean, I'm just a Vera fan, and I'm so glad to hear your presentations, and I was so glad to see that exhibit. So I'm just happy to be here.
I think it'd be fun to go down the road a little bit before we go to Q&A and just talk about something, Alyssa, you sort of alluded to, which was it was a hard sell to put this work in a museum, and it was in a commercial gallery, and I'd love to know how fabrics today are seen as maybe archive for future sort of exhibits and considered art or craft, and that old debate of art or craft. I'd love to hear a little more about the hard sell you had to make.
Sure. So I think the biggest problem was that she's a textile designer. That's a feminized field. There's a gender component there to maybe the dismissal of it as like not as important when it comes to design history. She was incredibly commercially successful. That's always going to be a liability in a fine art world. And then I would say she's also a populist at heart. She really, truly did believe on creating a high quality product at what at the time would have been a much more, accessible price point. So it's the combination of those three things that has written her out of American design history. And yeah, I just remember, oh gosh, I must have pitched the exhibition at least 2 or 3 times. And it was just like, oh, I don't know. What would people think? It was that kind of thing. And eventually, I mean, it's a long story, but there was just an opening on the calendar, and you had a chief curator who needed to fill that space, and so you take it. Yeah, and of course it was tremendously successful because I knew there was a cult following. I knew that the work was great, and I had also seen the watercolors, so that I knew that you could tell a story that was much, much broader than anyone knew, and you can combine it with the history of her career as an entrepreneur, which is also quite fascinating. So you had all aspects of who she was and what she accomplished, and that just makes for a fantastic exhibition experience.
And retail sales, Alex, how did you, were you questioned?
It's interesting. I think that the hard sell is definitely a universal thing, and we're really pleased that we have contributed to this visibility. We went into this very much as a passion project, and a way to justify some hoarding, but also thought that this would have a broad appeal to a market that we weren't necessarily engaging with. I mean, we're at the strata. It's like, we sell 6-figure, 7-figure art, blah blah blah. So to bring work to our audience and broaden that audience with works that would be more accessible, coming up with how we were pricing the work, also generated some challenges. And the closest kind of parallel that we could identify at the time was thinking about how architectural drawings had a corner of the fine art market, also a nascent one. It's as much as we're keen to look at drawings of a Frank Lloyd Wright building, the market and the secondary market for those images and artworks are really considered more artifacts than artworks per se. So the marketing we approached, we were like, great, first dibs. We're going to put the artworks on first dibs. This is going to be, interior designers are going to love this, like, really leaning into this. And First Dibs did a great editorial coverage of Vera's life and of the exhibition, written by another great art writer. And tick tock, tick tock. It was we sold nothing from the First Dibs coverage. No, that's not true. We sold one thing
You sold several.
from our First Dibs. Okay, okay. Maybe we had higher
Wasn't the
aspirations.
response you were
We did sell work from the exhibition to existing clients who were just enthralled by the kind of innovative approach that we were taking to it. But also, trying to, thinking about how a museum exhibition was, something that was really needed to tell the story. And Elisa and I mean, we talked about it from day one, I think at the opening of one of the dinners for the show. And even from there, it was like, not going to be an easy sell. And remarkably, I mean, I think with the success of the show and the scholarship, even getting the show to travel was, I mean,
impossible.
impossible. And this is just
Yeah,
improbable,
it was also,
right?
it ended in, I mean, a ladybug has been watching over this collection. It opened in August of 2019, closed January 2020. So, prior to COVID hitting, and then all the challenges. And I'm just going to make a comment that I think you're being too humble, because the first sale out of the first exhibition that Alexander did was the Oriental Poppies, and another one with blue butterflies called Riverbank, and the Davis Museum at Wellesley College were the purchasers of that. So.
Thank you for reminding me. That is always our goal, to sell to museums. And you're right, I do take that for granted. So yeah, so the commercial part of this, I think it does reflect the challenge of just this weird space between craft, between industrial design and the fine art world.
But wait, we should say one more thing. You can't really do an exhibition like this without having someone who's brought together the company in some way and preserved it. Like, I would never have been able to source 75 small postcards or 100 scarves or 55 napkins and all the historical material. It's too many loans, and trying to do that on top of selling an exhibition like this would never have worked. So thankfully, you had a large group of works, Alex had a large group of works, and then I could almost buy anything I wanted off of Etsy to fill in. And that's essentially why we could do the exhibition at all.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that, like, the degree of professionalism that's required to make this happen in a museum. I mean, the museum's registrar, our registrar at the gallery, I mean, we were indexing and measuring and condition reporting the napkins that we eat on every day. I mean, it was just like, what are we doing? I just want to drop off a Dwayne Reed bag with some napkins in a Ziploc bag. The other thing that I think is interesting and that has opened up a little bit is artists like Susie Zuzak, who was the artist who made all of Lily Pulitzer's prints and designs. She passed away in the past, 5 years or so, and a prominent art lawyer in New York with whom we're close called one day and was like, so I'm working with this client. They've got this trove of Susie Zuzak designs. They were never credited to her for her work with Lily Pulitzer. What do we do? Is there a market, et cetera? Fast forward, the Cooper Hewitt did a beautiful show of these original artworks. So, I feel like this template that's in place is really ready to soar. I also think that fashion plays a really big piece in this as well. I mean, fashion people definitely showed up to see our show. Duro Olu, who loves Vera Neumann designs, Betsy Johnson, innovators.
I guess to me the question is, let's say Vera never made any scarves. I mean, would her work be hanging in museums? I would say yes. If she hadn't chosen that path of becoming a commercial endeavor to produce products for the home and to wear, and just said, okay, I'm going to be a fine artist, I think she would have been a successful fine artist. I think it's the broad appeal and the mass distribution of her products that, you know, perhaps made it difficult to put your exhibition together.
I might push back on this a little bit because, you know, I mentioned Guerrilla Girls, and no, because she was a woman, and a woman at this time, the art market did not support artists, female artists at that time, and that's a heartbreaking reality. We
But
also
I guess I think that it would have maybe been easier to put an exhibition together,
no,
like, you know,
fast forward, absolutely,
fabulous
yeah.
unknown female
Yeah,
artists
yeah.
type thing,
But-
because I think the quality of the work is there.
Unquestioned, unquestioned. And, you know, even like thinking about the relationship with Lee Krasner, that, you know, until the past literally 5 years, the market for Lee Krasner's work and the visibility, she was just Jackson Pollock's, you know, long-suffering wife, and incredible widow and steward of Pollock's legacy. We also represent the estate of Betty Parsons, of, you know, an artist who was Vera's age and very much a compatriot, and an entrepreneur with her very well-known eponymous gallery. But during her lifetime, she exhibited art, but it was not something that the gallery supported her time traveling and making art. And this is a market that we're, you know, currently building. And I like to say these are 10-year projects to identify and get passionate about an artist who's been overlooked for any multitude of reasons, but, you know, our lane is race, gender, and geography. And that 10-year project involves deep cataloging of work and identifying context and investing in exhibitions and publications, et cetera. And the remarkable thing that Susan has done as a steward of this legacy, which is driven by your heart. I mean, there is no upside in this for you. I know this directly, right? You know, these passion projects are what really strike a match that we see a decade or a decade and a half later reflected in, so certainly in the art market. This may be true in fashion as well. Maybe Zara and H&M sped that up a little bit. Ironic, right, with the popularization of Vera's products. So yeah, so all this is to say, selling these as fine art, it's an ongoing project.
Yeah, it works. I think we should probably turn to Q&A at this point. We welcome your questions. Yes, hi everybody, we can see you now.
We're live streaming, by the way.
Hi, it was absolutely fabulous, everybody. I think, you know, we learned a lot. My field is mid-century women who are unknown because men's names are on the label or anything else. I think it still goes on, but I think, you know, you would be surprised how many Veras are out there in all the design fields, you know, furniture, architecture, fine art, you know, I could go on and on. I'm an accessory designer myself, so, you know, shoes and handbags, and I think it's a pretty common story, you know, the rediscovery, and as you say, you know, I think there will be more and more museum, but it is a hard sell. I mean, I'm going through the same thing now with a world tour of a woman, you know, Beth Levine, who was a great shoe designer who nobody knows who she was. And actually, you know, we're raised to think in fashion school, I taught at FIT, that it's the European men to be copied, but the European men like Manolo Blahnik and Christian Louboutin, who I know wrote the blurbs for my book because they're looking at American women designers. That's where the genius is. So I don't have a question. It was just a comment.
But that also brings up an interesting problem with, well, I'm thinking of textiles, the way that textile design works, where you might have a name and then a group of people working under that name. I'm also thinking of Mary Mecco, right, where you have a number of designers that people don't know their names. For Vera, I mean, that's also what I had an audience that was just fascinated by the fact that she was creating everything. She had her own dye works. She would also produce it. She would print it. She would distribute it. You know, this vertical integration of the company just doesn't exist anymore. So that she was, she really stands out in the field in that way when it comes to textile design.
Well, also that it was her name, and she's the one who actually painted those designs.
And she actually took credit for it rather than it being given to someone else. And she had her name, right? I mean, her name on the product reinforced that. But yeah, at her height, she was painting 500 paintings a year. So, you're right. Oh,
We
okay.
have to repeat the question so it's recorded. The gentleman is asking
Okay.
about the ladybug insignia and the story behind that.
Well, I can tell you how it started. She was painting one day, and she looked down, and there was a little jot of vermilion at the bottom near where she would have her signature. And she thought, I'm going to turn that into a ladybug because, you know, ladybugs are known for good luck. They're also known for good health and longevity, too. So she decided to use that. And it appeared, boy, I hate to give you a specific date because I don't have it at the top of my head, but I will find it out. But it was late 60s, early 70s that it showed up. And for those of you who collect scarves, you will see the evolution of her signature. It starts out very small and somewhat naive. And as she grew in stature, the Vera became larger as well. So have I answered your question? Okay. Okay.
We hot? Yeah. Hey, good to see you all. Fascinating to hear the beginning and the middle of the story. We want to know about the end. What happened? Where did it all go? She's hot for 40 years, then she's not. And then you buy the company. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
You know, we all grew up with this stuff. We were surrounded by it, and then one day it was all gone.
Well,
Now it's all on eBay. What happened?
well, I think we're probably all aware of trends. That some things, you know, whether it's color or types of design or shapes, come and go. Her business, as I mentioned earlier, when her husband died, she sold her company to Manhattan Industries in 1967. And then in 1989, Salant Corporation did a hostile takeover of Manhattan Industries and primarily looking for the portfolio name. And, you know, also one thing that always impressed me is think about this. Vera was born in 1907. She sold her first scarf to Lord & Taylor in 1947. So she was 40 years old when she started her business. And she passed away in 93, but after Salant had bought the company, that was 89, they were really focusing on the menswear. And so with that, plus her passing, the brand continued, but like with Lilly Pulitzer, it went quiet. And it had continued, but in a smaller way. And I came across, well, I had been aware of Vera because I was in the industry. But I was hired, I was in direct mail, and I had been being hired to help get companies in that industry turned around. One of them was the Tog Shop, who had bought the Vera brand, and they were continuing to manufacture clothing and sportswear. And so, but they were struggling a bit with their business. So I went down to, I flew down from Boston to Atlanta and then drove 3 hours into the cotton fields and peanut fields to Americus, Georgia, and met with their board of directors. And I had known their president. And I said to him, hey, Carl, I know you have the name. What else did you get? And he said, oh, I'll show you when you come down. So after we met with the board of directors, we walked together through this warehouse, wound our way through, up these stairs, and past these offices of, unused business equipment. And he opened the door, and there were 20,000 scarves hanging there. And what you just did, I did. I mean, it was like being at the Wizard of Oz when it goes from black and white to color. I walked over, and as was in an earlier slide, you saw there was a beautiful design, but then it was colored in all these different ways. And I said to him, what's this all doing here? And he goes, well, there's more. And we continued to walk through, and the next room was full of wooden boxes. He opened them up, and in them were all the strike-offs or soft prints. What are those? After her artwork, they would do a print based on what they were going to use it on, and check color and so forth. So there were thousands of them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is here too. And he says, come on, come on. So we walked into the last room, and piled up were all these big gray archival art boxes, like great big pizza boxes, think of that way. And he opened the lid, there's all the original art. So I'm babbling incoherently at this point, and I said to him, we'll get your catalogs back on track. I feel very confident with that. But this is your future. She was a force. And he said, well, come on board, get us turned around, and we'll let you do something with it. And so I did. I joined them, and about a year and a half later, the business is up and running. And the owner said, this is a great time to sell everything. And I'm like, what? And I don't know where it came from, but I just approached them and I said, I'd like you, is it possible for you to carve out this section of your company? Because I'd love to revitalize this brand. And they said no. And I went, wow. So I then, coincidentally, went to listen to a lecture on Thomas Troward, who happens to be a New Thought British philosopher back from the last century. And he had a line or a quote, and it said, when you hold an idea firmly in consciousness, the means to make it happen have already been set in motion. cool, right? So I sat back and I thought, well, I can sit here and say, oh, that's cool. Or I can proceed as if it's so. So I went back to the owner and the president and sat down, had a long talk, and negotiated back and forth. And 2 years to the day I started with them, I bought it. So you know, and everything about that was incongruous. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. And I got connected to a local bank in Atlanta. The loan officer came in, and I had put this vintage scarves across the table. And she came in, she goes, oh, Vera, wait a minute, is this like Vera? And she said, I was told it was Vera Neumann, an artist. And I said, well, she was, but yes, this is Vera. And we're in a high-rise building in Atlanta. And I said to her, we're talking, and I said, sit still. And I plucked a ladybug out of her hair. Honest story. And she's like, oh my God, maybe we're going to do this together. So it was great. And then she said, well, of course I have the loan committee to deal with. And it's a bunch of old guys. And she said, but can I borrow the scarves? And I said, sure. And she said, don't get your hopes up because banks don't like scarves. They like brick and mortar, And so she put the scarves across the table. In come all the guys sitting down. Last one in the room was Buddy, who's 77, walks in, looks at the table. He goes, wait a minute. Is this that Vera lady? And he goes, oh my God, my wife still has her scarves. She loves those black, red, and white ones. She goes to the Georgia games all the time. We still have her placemats. How much does she need? So, and I have to say, I mean, even with Alex, like he said, he called Rebecca Cochran, and he says, I don't suppose in a city of 4 million people, you happen to know this woman until yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. And so it was really that sort of kismet that has...
Showing up for the miracle is what you do
Oh.
constantly, and it's a real inspiration,
Oh.
Susan.
Oh, don't make me cry.
So, Mark, do we have time for one more question, or should people ask questions at the book signing?
No, we probably should move on.
Okay.
Let me take this off.
Okay.
So
But
Susan will be
Susan,
signing
we could
books.
listen to you all afternoon. It's just, we can't. There'll be another presentation coming in, but just promise you'll come back. Okay.
Yeah.
There is a book signing outside, and also Susan helped Modernism Week work with